In 1870, a young man named Charles Taze Russell started a world-renouncing Bible study group that would not only survive his death, but would boast over 8 million members by the year 2019. Today on Odin's Throne, we discuss the history, deviant behaviors, and cult status of the Jehovah's Witness. Charles Taze Russell grew up in Pennsylvania working at his family's clothing store. Russell's mother had died when he was just 9 years old, and this created a situation where his early life really revolved around working with his father and studying scripture through a Presbyterian lens. As a young adult, Russell began engaging with the ideas of the Seventh-day Adventists, which at the time was a recently formed millenarian movement. Although he wasn't converted, the Adventist ideas about the end times changed his perception of Scripture. Shortly thereafter, Russell began a Bible study group of his own and also started publishing a religious periodical entitled Zion's Watchtower and Herald of Christ's Presence. The periodical focused on Russell's own brand of scripture analysis, which was highly dependent on fear-mongering about the end of the world, which was then framed in this context of a pseudo-intellectual biblical numerology. So with the help of this religious literature, Russell's small study group turned into 30 congregations by 1880. Also around this time, Russell sold his family's clothing store, which he had expanded over the previous 10 years. And when it was all said and done, Russell made somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 to $300,000, making him a multi-millionaire by today's standard. Russell managed to do all this by the time he was about 30 years old, so it begs the question, what are you doing with your life? The answer is hopefully not starting a cult. In the following years, Russell was able to use his fortune to promote his Bible group, now called Zion's Watchtower and Tract Society. The group printed a great deal of literature, all based on Russell's interpretation of the Bible, specifically the New Testament and the Book of Revelations. The common thread here was a chronological assessment of biblical passages about the second coming of Christ, which, of course, Russell believed he had the special ability to decipher. And this brings to light the millenarian aspects of the Jehovah's Witness. So let's discuss this for a moment. Millenarian movements tend to focus their efforts on preparing for a cataclysmic event that changes society as we know it. Now, this might come in the form of the actual destruction of the world, a second coming of Jesus, or some other drastic form of supernatural intervention which changes the way all humans exist. Russell's brand of millenarianism was based on his study of certain timelines given in the Bible and paired with his belief in pyramidology. Yeah, so Russell believed that the Great Pyramid was built to house some kind of information which was planted there by God through the work of the Hebrews who built it. And only now, of course, in the modern age, could the secrets of the pyramid be revealed by Russell, who used measurements from the pyramid in his mathematical assessment as to the date of the second coming of Christ. Russell's predictions have allowed the Jehovah's Witness to incorrectly predict the end times on several occasions, most notably in 1914, 1918, 1925, and 1975. Of course, these failures have all been explained away with a mental gymnastics of one sort or another. And since 1975, the witnesses have been pretty apprehensive to give any hard dates for the second coming of Christ, although they do have a very complicated and convoluted way of tracking when the next coming may be happening. But what exactly is going to happen during this second coming? Well, according to the Jehovah's Witness themselves, the second coming will be a time where 144,000 people, specifically those who have proven themselves worthy, will be taken to heaven while the rest of the population will suffer the consequences of non-belief. Now, seeing as how there's over 8 million JWs alone, it seems like there will be a few of the faithful left out in the cold, as it were. Conveniently, after the number of JW members grew to over 144,000, Russell's idea was retconned to say that all Jehovah's Witness members before 1935 would enter heaven, and all future Jehovah's Witnesses would live for eternity on earth, which is not that great of a consolation prize. Now, apparently, God is going to fix the place up, and there will be peace and food and all that good stuff. So, congratulations. So this talk of end times is all very questionable, of course, from a secular perspective, and could definitely fill an entire video by itself, but I digress. Let's get back to Mr. Russell. Now, after ramping up his biblical work in the 1880s, Russell continued publishing at an ever-increasing rate. Between 1886 and 1904, he wrote 6 books, which would become the core of what the JW is today. Russell also wrote a 7th book, which was published after his death in 1916. This 7th book became quite the source of controversy when it was found that 2 of Russell's associates and Joseph Rutherford actually wrote the book. After Russell's death in 1916, we can see that there's a juncture point where we see the formation of the modern-day Jehovah's Witness. Within a year of Russell's death, Joseph Franklin Rutherford, the guy who helped write the controversial 7th book, came to helm the group. He appointed himself a judge. Now, it's not exactly clear what that title entailed or if it was actually recognized within the group. Rutherford immediately began the process of facelifting the entire organization, and this included renaming the group to Jehovah's Witness, and a significant amount of editing was done to the original work of Russell in order to bring his ideas in line with the modern era. Rutherford also made significant changes to the way members, now known as brothers and sisters, engaged with their faith as Jehovah's Witnesses. He implemented mandatory door-to-door preaching, which needed to be recorded and then submitted to the elders of each congregation. This meant that you not only needed to get out and spread the word, but you must also track the time you spent doing it. These 2 activities make up the core of how the JW convert new members and keep older members accountable to the community. Between then and now, the witnesses have continued to grow in numbers and spread geographically across the globe. The doctrine, rules, and methods of conversion have come and gone, and so have some of the members. There's actually a pretty extensive community of ex-Jehovah's Witness members on YouTube who are dedicated to following Jehovah's Witness news and criticizing it as they see necessary. Many of these channels also offer help and information to current Jehovah's Witnesses who are questioning their faith. I watched a lot of videos, a lot of different channels in the research process for this video, and links to many of them are listed below. So now that we've got a bit of the history of the Jehovah's Witness, and before I do my concluding remarks about the cult status of the JW, I'd like to run down 5 of what I find to be the most notable deviant beliefs and behaviors that the JW currently exhibit. Number 1, blood transfusions are strictly forbidden. JW.org claims that the rejection of blood transfusions is a religious matter as a result of their close following of certain scripture. They cite several passages which all contain warnings against the act of eating blood. Of course, this is interesting to note that at the time these passages were written, blood transfusions did not exist, and they wouldn't exist for thousands of years after. However, the JW has decided that this is what the original intention of the passage was. Now, the only data I could find on rates of death of blood refusal was an estimate of 900 Jehovah's Witnesses per year. Admittedly, it's a small number compared to the over 8 million members. However, even one death as a result of questionable religious beliefs is a bit too many in my opinion. Number 2, no celebrating most holidays. The basic concept here is that celebrating holidays is akin to accepting the secular world, which has co-opted these holidays for commercial uses. Christmas, of course, is a clear example where the iconography is certainly not Christian. Images of Santa Claus, Christmas trees, and a focus on materialistic goods all run counter to the Jehovah's Witness world-rejecting perspective. Number 3, proselytization is a key component of the JW lifestyle. Active members must preach in order to maintain their active status within the group. This often includes in-home Bible study offerings, and of course, you've likely seen JW standing on a corner handing out literature from their cart. Unlike mainstream religions, Jehovah's Witness does not rely on generational reproduction to increase their overall numbers. This heavy focus on converting non-Jehovah's Witnesses into Jehovah's Witnesses is an absolutely integral part of the overall growth and function of the group. Number 4, shunning, known as disfellowship within the JW, is the act of cutting off all communication with a member who has fallen away from the group's ideological principles or has behaved in non-conforming ways. This type of group rejection often comes at the request of higher-up elders. However, this is contentious as the JW claims that they do not actively shun former members, but instead actively reach out to those who have drifted away from the group. The key here is that the shunned person must return to the appropriate ways and beliefs prescribed by the Jehovah's Witness. Many accounts of ex-JW members focus on shunning as the most difficult aspect of them leaving the group. Stories often revolve around family members cutting ties completely with the disfellowshipped person due to pressure from congregation elders. Fifth and finally, sexuality is a major hot-button topic for the Jehovah's Witness. According to most JW literature, any kind of sexual act or thought outside of a married man and woman having intercourse for reproduction is strictly forbidden. Homosexuality is viewed as a choice and can be brought on by masturbation. Check out the John Cedars YouTube channel, which is linked below, if you want to see some commentary on crazy videos straight from JWHQ on how to avoid the deadly sin of masturbation. Of course, where there is sexual repression, there always seems to be sex scandals, and Jehovah's Witness is no different. Recently in Australia, there were records of hundreds of Jehovah's Witness members who have been investigated by the group for child sex abuse, but thanks to the two-witness rule, these cases never made it to the police for investigation. The two-witness rule means that if there is ever a suggestion that a JW member committed a sin, there must have been two adult witnesses there to corroborate the story, unless there is a confession. So, are the Jehovah's Witnesses actually a cult? Well, two things. First, it depends on whom you ask. If you ask the Jehovah's Witness, they're likely to say that they are practicing the true form of Christianity as it was always meant to be. They reject the notion that they are a sect or a cult, and they believe they're not just a religion, but they are the religion. Second, it depends on the accepted definition of the word cult. Now, for our purposes, we're going to be using a bit of a multivariate strategy, which again is complicated and will be discussed at length in a video of its own. But generally speaking, the variables for cult identification include the age of the group, its deviant behaviors and beliefs, the assessment of charismatic leaders, intense doctrination techniques, and isolation from the secular world. With this in mind, I say yes, the Jehovah's Witness certainly is a cult. The group is relatively new by religious standards. They espouse world-renouncing beliefs which remove them from the secular world. They are obsessed with strict regulations surrounding sexual behavior. The founder was a rich guy who believed he could decipher biblical text through a complex and convoluted process. And finally, they use aggressive proselytizing tactics to attract new members and keep current members from leaving. Of course, not all cults are created equal. Most are actually fairly innocuous, while a few who get all the attention are extremely violent. So where do the Jehovah's Witness fall on the cult spectrum? If we take into account the world-renouncing positions of the doctrine, the strict rules which often focus on sexuality, the high level of dedication required to participate, and the questionable origins of the group's founding doctrine, I would rate the Jehovah's Witness at 6 JW literature carts out of 10. So there you have it, the Jehovah's Witness. I hope you enjoyed the video. The content of this video was gathered primarily from empirical sources of a sociological nature. Information was also gathered from a variety of YouTube channels. Links to the literature and videos used in the making of this content can be found in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And if you'd like to see a specific topic addressed on Odin's Throne, please comment below.